Hello, everyone. Sorry we're a little bit late in getting started here. We were trying to connect to our other platforms, including Instagram. So we're going to try and post a recording this on Instagram later. This is our first live stream with our new employee, Ishan, who's our Community Benefits Coordinator. And we're here to talk about the Hamilton Community Benefits Network and community benefits themselves. What are community benefits? Well, we're going to find out today. Ishan?
Hello, as Carl mentioned, my name is Ishan. We're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. We just want to say that we're grateful to be residing on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This land is governed by the Dish with One Spoon wampum, a historical pre-contact wampum that states that we take what we need from the land and not to abuse it. It's a part of the Great Peace of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and was an agreement with the Anishinaabe to protect and be stewards of the land and share its resources. And another important wampum is also the two-row wampum, which also covers this land. And it was made between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Dutch, kind of emphasizing living in harmony with one another. So living on this territory makes us all people, all Hamilton Treaty people. So those who come as settlers or immigrants of this generation or earlier generations, as well as those who are brought involuntarily as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and imperialism. As we're here today, we live in the contradictions of being treaty peoples in the midst of broken treaties and persistent inaction and idling. So we commit to searching for the right words, thoughts, hearts, and actions to align ourselves with Indigenous rights and self-determination. To introduce ourselves, I'm Ishan. I'm the new Community Engagement Coordinator here. We have Carl, our Community Benefits Manager, and Kubra, our lead organizer, who unfortunately sends her regrets as she cannot be here with us today.
So there has been growing interest in community benefits in Ontario. Stemming from this, community benefits agreements have become increasingly popular. Community benefit agreements are a strategic tool that's used when discussing the development of community wealth, specifically with the purpose of mitigating the impacts of gentrification on a community. They typically outline specific programmatic and material commitments and are used to develop infrastructure projects through a transparent and inclusive process. In the past, it's been common practice for large economic developments to be built without the consultation of the community that it is directly impacted by such projects. It's hoped through the use of community benefit agreements, these projects can be developed while also giving voice to community members, especially those who have been excluded or marginalized. So, what is a community benefit agreement? Well, they are founded between various signatories, which differ based on the specific project. They are most commonly found as a commitment between the government, contracting firm, and the community. Neighborhood based groups and other community organizations representing causes such as affordable housing and environmental sustainability form a coalition that advocates on behalf of the community to the contracting firm. The power in a community benefit agreement comes from the community. The community coalition must continue to pressure actively for better gains through protest, education, and engagement. Community benefit members work actively with developers, city staff, and other levels of government to bring voices to the coalition to the bargaining table. Community benefit agreements function best when an active and engaged group stand up and demand a voice on a project that could fundamentally change the neighborhoods and cities they call home. The history of community benefits started in the late 1990s as new money was flowing into urban redevelopment projects. Previous urban development, for example, here in downtown Hamilton, with the massive blockbusting that gave us Jackson Square, Cops Coliseum, the Art Gallery of Hamilton, the Convention Center, and the Ellen Felkwell building, destroyed whole neighborhoods and left nothing but new infrastructure in their wake. With previous generations of experience with urban renewal destroying neighborhood, the residents began to organize against this. This time, in addition to resistance against the project, some groups which traditionally had been brushed aside stepped up and demanded that these changes to their communities actually had a net community benefit positive. Organizers and community leaders began to demand a seat at the table and voices into how urban renewal public dollars that might shape their community would be spent, and what additional gains beyond the simple infrastructure themselves would happen in that community.
So now we know a little bit about what community benefit agreements are. So who are we as HCBN? Um, well, the Hamilton Community Benefits Network looks to become one of the voices in helping shape the development of our neighborhood. We bring together different sectors across the city of Hamilton, so it's a broad collective made up of representatives from Hamilton Building Trades, the Immigrant Working Center, Hamilton District Labor Council, the YWCA, and many other organizations that you can see pictured here. All HCBN members envision an inclusive, thriving city in which all residents have equitable opportunities to contribute to building healthy communities and a prospering economy.
So, how did we get here? So, to start with, a little bit of history. Um, way back under the previous government in May 26, 2015, that the then Ontario Liberal government passed a bill called the Ontario Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act, Bill 6. And with the hard work of community, it included community benefit requirements for some infrastructure projects in Ontario. This was to be a pilot the Ontario government was taking to try and reimagine how they were spending their public dollars for net social good. And they set up a series of pilots. And one of those pilot locations that was selected, of course, was the Hamilton Light Rail Project. And because of this, and inspired by the success of the Toronto Community Benefits Network, the Hamilton Community Benefits Network was formed. The original foundation document was produced, borrowed basically from TCBN and modified with a Hamilton lens. And then it gained approval and was revised through the Hcbn with some stakeholder meetings way back in July 6th, July 19th of 2017 to form the Hcbn foundation document. After meetings with many stakeholders, community groups, labor organizations, and residents, the Hcbn was incorporated along the similar lines to the TCBN on August 14th, 2017. And we had a first annual general meeting way back then, and a board of directors was elected by the membership. So the Hcbn board engaged in a series of community benefit conversations and large surveys of residents to help shape what community benefit agreements might look like for the Hamilton LRT. Some early requests that came from resident consultation included input into station designs, green roofs and LEED building standards, the need for a community hub to be built along the corridor or possibly at the operation and maintenance facility, water fountains at LRT stops, replacement of the affordable housing lost along the corridor, twice as much as was lost by the actual property procurement of Metrolinx. At that time, the then government actually budgeted $5.8 million of the project to replace those lost affordable housing units. We had discussed and partnered with the Hamilton Community Foundation, one of our funders, to double that amount. We also had discussions around pop-up parks, open spaces on the demolished building sites. And as for the first Metrolinx community art project, which we'll look at in a minute. So at that time, Metrolinx was very willing to engage with us as a community partner and to hear resident demands. Next slide. So one of those was an early decent work project that we'll look at now. This is a press release from that project back in June 2019. And it was a partnership with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, local artists, then Sir John A. Macdonald and Delta, Prince of Wales School. And what we did is we put together a bunch of artists, and got Metrolinx and the Community Foundation to pay them for decent wages to do some art in the classroom projects. And what we did though is we selected buildings, those were all commercial buildings along the corridor, to have these pop-up art and student art presentations presented. Over the summer, we had we originally had 5 projects. Only 3 were ever deployed because of the cancellation of the project. However, we can show you some of the art from those projects here. So this was near the Longwood station at Main and Longwood, and these are some of the community arts projects that were installed. Though these art projects are still up, however, the building is scheduled for demolition soon, and these art projects will be removed, and the ones that are still in decent shape will be rehoused and available for community display. This is the hard work, of course, of some grade 5 students at the Coos Paradise Public School, and we mounted all of these arts and had some benches installed and just made a little community gathering area. And the next one, these were from Sir John A. Macdonald and Delta School students, and they were visual photography and painted art. And they are still installed at the building near Wentworth, near the location of the Wentworth station, in an old thrift shop building, and those are still on display, although they're looking a little weathered now. And they are available, of course, if you want to take a walk down the corridor and have a look. And then this next installation, the third one that we were able to get installed before the cancellation of the project, what is in an old legal office in a building that is now demolished, that was near the Gage Park station. And this was done by Prince of Wales Elementary School students and their families. And as you can see, they took various footprints and then they were transposed into printed material. And these arts have been removed prior to the demolition and are going to be placed at a different location. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the Hamilton Light Rail project. As you know, it's always been a contentious project. The started way back in with an announcement of full federal funding, full provincial funding for a 14-kilometer stretch of rail running from McMaster University to Eastgate Station through some of the densest neighborhoods in Hamilton. There's going to be 91 full property procurements, which will make Metrolinx a very large landowner in the city of Hamilton. Though that property procurement has resulted in the displacement of residents as well as an increase in the speculation along the land, along the corridor of that line of that land, with an eye to redeveloping it. Anytime an LRT is built in a major city, it does increase the property values around the corridor that it's meant to serve, which means their developers flood into that area in order to buy new land, which is what we're seeing right now along the Hamilton LRT corridor. So despite the on-again, off-again nature of the project, the board continued with stakeholder engagements, meetings, outreach, and discussions. The Hcbn was able to score some small victories that we talked about, including design stations, creation of working groups to talk about this, environmental affordable housing. We had community conversations, pilot art projects, and a research project that we partnered with McMaster to outline the successes of community benefits in Hamilton. Some attention. We also continued with another partnership with the semester and resident students to further refine our community engagement model. We've hosted now 5 community engagement sessions publicly since the re-announcement of the project. Next slide. And another amazing gain was, of course, a community benefits subcommittee that reports directly to Hamilton General Issues Committee. This was founded back when Matthew Green was still a local councillor. He's moved on to be an MP, but there you can see us without masks, happily at City Hall, celebrating the success of this community benefits committee. Unfortunately, the committee hasn't had a chance to meet yet due to a variety of delays in staff in finalizing the terms of reference and some council directions. We're hopeful that at the March GIC meeting that City Council will address that problem and bring the committee together to form so that we can start bringing some of these community benefit conversations directly to stakeholders. So LRT is back on the table. $3.4 billion have been offered by the federal and provincial governments, with a commitment to both affordable housing and some targets for inclusionary hiring along the corridor to provide access to marginalized folks into the building trades and professional, administrative, and technical. But I want to talk a little bit about the LRT and what it means. We are looking at a redesign of 14 kilometers of the city from property line to property line. It will be torn up and rebuilt. So that means new sidewalks, new traffic signals, new traffic crossings, new roadways, new infrastructure, both subsurface and above surface. So what we want to do is hear from you, the residents of Hamilton, on what you think should be included in community benefits and what we should be doing to advocate to make sure that the transformation of that 14 kilometers of our city, let's remember a large percentage of that population, property procurement, I should say, happened in Ward 3, one of our poorest wards in the city, and an area that was identified as a code red neighborhood and an area of significant economic challenge. So this is going to provide an opportunity for development, but we have to work with the city of Hamilton and with residents to make sure that that development is done in a progressive way that is most inclusive, so that the changes in the city that are happening create more net affordable housing, create more inclusionary zoning opportunities. So what we're looking for with the opportunities from this project is to work with the city of Hamilton and Metrolinx to shift the focus to the project to include community benefits, and to hear from anybody tuning in right now about what those community benefits should be, so that we can have some stake in the changing that's coming across this corridor.
So one thing we would encourage you to think about as as we talk about community benefits and the LRT project is, what do you envision for a healthy transit line in Hamilton? And what would the streets or surrounding neighborhoods look like as the LRT arrives? Um, Reflecting on this and providing us with your thoughts and your feedback can really help us advocate for for what you envision. So a little bit of information as to why we're here today. What is this presentation for? Um, well, the objectives of this discussion are, well, first we want to understand how the LRT will impact residents living across the city, um, and also how the LRT will be changing your day-to-day life. We also want to understand what community benefits you would like to see in the LRT project that will support your desires and needs. We're going to be having upcoming community dialogues, and we had a survey that was circulating that is now closed and being studied by our research group. But with our upcoming community dialogues, we would encourage you to join us and talk with us about what you would like to see in a community benefits agreement. One thing we'd like to emphasize is that this is not being facilitated by the City of Hamilton in any way, but the feedback you provide will be taken by the Hcbn and used to negotiate a community benefits agreement with the city and Metrolinx on behalf of the community. We also want to note that final decisions on the community benefits are not made as we are going through this discussion. These dialogues are simply to engage community members and hear their thoughts. So I want to go over some examples of community benefits that we've seen in other areas. So the first two examples come from the Crosstown Eglinton LRT in Toronto. The Crosstown Eglinton LRT runs between Keele Street and Laird Drive. And in 2014, the Toronto Community Benefits Network and Metrolinx signed a community benefits agreement that included the following. So apprenticeship opportunities. This emphasized that the Crosstown Transit Solutions committed to having historically disadvantaged residents perform 10% of all trade or craft working hours that were required to complete the project. They committed to establishing a framework to hire skilled newcomers and had a target of hiring at least 50 skilled newcomers. The community also advocated for the preservation of the Kodak building, as you can see pictured here, as a historic site. So this building was then incorporated into the design of one of the LRT stops, and part of the building was earmarked for community use. Our next example is the Vancouver Olympic Village that was used for the 2010 Winter Olympic Games. So local procurement was emphasized. So the developer, Millennium Southeast Falls Creek Properties, signed an agreement to procure $15 million worth of goods, products, equipment, and services from registered businesses located in or supportive of the inner city. So this was a community benefit that was designated to promote economic opportunity for small and local businesses. Our next example is the Woodbine Casino. The community benefit established for this project was primarily community use of space. So at least one large-scale event per month in the entertainment venue would be allocated to the local community for little to no cost. There was also contribution towards a childcare center. So $5 million was contributed towards a childcare center, sorry. There was also commitment to public reporting that was emphasized in the community benefit agreement. So there was a commitment to provide quarterly and annual progress reports to the public on all CBAs and annual city staff reports to the Toronto City Council. Another example is the Staples Center. So this is an example in the United States. It's a multi-purpose arena in Los Angeles. Some of the unique community benefits that came from this had to do with community parks and recreation needs. So the developers of the Staples Center agreed to put $1 million towards an assessment of community parks and recreation needs. And the developer also agreed to fund a residential parking program for surrounding neighborhoods. What we have seen in the Parkdale neighborhood um, has to do a lot with affordable housing, something that is also a big concern here in Hamilton. So Parkdale was considered to be one of the last affordable neighborhoods in Toronto. But with new real estate and economic developments entering the neighborhood, there was a huge decline in tenant rights and equitable housing opportunities. For example, there were unlawful rent increases and resident displacements. So the Parkdale CBA framework was developed as a response and recommended several community benefits that residents of Parkdale might ask for from developers in the future. And these were in regards to affordable housing, affordable commercial spaces, opportunities for decent work, and the improvement of community assets. So an example of this would be in regards to affordable housing. The Parkdale Community Benefits Agreement demanded that for new high-rise housing developments of 8 stories or higher, a minimum of 30% of the units within that building would be designated as permanently affordable. So these might be units that are rent geared to income or less than or equal to the average market rent in the area. Another out-of-country example is the Brooklyn Basin, a project site in Oakland, California, that includes 64 acres of waterfront property. When this development was being planned, the Community Benefits Agreement assured that 465 of the 3,100 residential units built were made affordable for families earning $50,000 or less in annual income. In addition, 25% of the 465 affordable units were designated for senior housing. Our last example is the Finch West LRT, which is currently being developed by Metrolinx in Toronto. The Finch West LRT CBA builds on the CBA signed in 2014 between Metrolinx and the City of Toronto and features a community arts hub as well as a center for arts 1 block west of Jane and Finch. So what are some examples that we can see of community benefits requested here for the Hamilton LRT? Some things that we've heard have been heated station stops, public Wi-Fi, water bottle filling stations, energy efficient buildings, naturalization and green space, unionized jobs, and jobs for equity seeking groups. And one thing that we want to be transparent about is how we're collecting our data. So as I mentioned, we're having virtual community dialogue sessions with diverse sets of community groups. We've had a few with Acorn, and we have a couple more with Acorn coming up. We've recently had a town hall on inclusionary zoning with Acorn and Environment Hamilton, and we'll be organizing future events too. We have a partnership with the McMaster Research Shop, and they're currently in the process of analyzing an online survey. and even just conversations like this where we're trying to get you informed on what community benefits are and what we're trying to do. So how is this feedback used and collected? Um, so we collect the data from benefits presentations and this survey that we've put out. And with that, we create community benefit recommendations report that will be provided. The research shop will create a recommendation report that will be provided to the network to help give a better idea about the wants that the community has. After the report is completed, the HCBN will use the information to discuss and negotiate benefits to help create a community benefits agreement between the city, Metrolinx, and the community. And finally, we will be taking your feedback um, about our presentations and about our dialogues so that we can create an event format that could be more engaging and inclusive to help maximize participation during our future events. So that was the end of our presentation, and we have our contact info listed over here. You're welcome to follow us on social media or send any of us an email if you have any questions um, regarding community benefits. And to end it off, I think we'll just go about asking some questions to I'll throw some questions to Carl, who might be able to kind of elaborate on some concerns that some people might have. So about the first question that I think might be important to answer is how can Hamiltonians aid in advocating for community benefits? If you might be able to speak to that, Carl.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy. So, community benefits is still a really new thought in Ontario. Generally, it's only existed since the '90s, and there's been so many opportunities that have kind of passed us by in the in our current their current opportunity and development that's going on in the city. So we advise people who are interested in learning more about community benefits because it's so new to kind of follow us on social media, as Isham mentioned, reach out to us, attend some of our events to really give us some of your feedback, but also make sure that you're if you ever have an opportunity to talk to your counselors, that you're engaging with them about community benefits and asking them, hey, why did the Pier 8 waterfront redevelopment happen without any community benefits conversation? Why is the redevelopment of the Jamesville affordable housing complex going ahead? What about the new downtown entertainment precinct that's being proposed that includes 3 city properties and most of our downtown assets, that Cops Coliseum that I talked about, the art gallery, and and the convention center, all being turned over in a 50-year lease to private developers. So the when we're talking about community engagements, what we really want to do is hear from folks and then get them engaged with the process, get them understanding that this community benefit agreements are one way that folks can really actually have a voice in the way that our city is changing. We're talking about $2 billion a year in development that's coming to this city, and there hasn't been a community benefits agreement, an inclusionary zoning bylaw passed. We are basically rebuilding our city with the new hot property market with very little input from the people whose lives are being changed by this. We're seeing mass displacement. We're seeing tent cities all over the place. Our city is changing, but it's not necessarily changing for the best. So my encouragement would be to reach out to us, to attend our sessions, but also just to start thinking about community benefits as a way that we can add an extra layer of influence into the change that's going on in our city.
Thanks, Carl. So, in terms of development, what changes can we expect when development begins, and when might that be happening?
So we are looking at shovels in the ground for the Hamilton LRT in uh, spring to maybe summer 2023. And what you can look at is the last plan, although Metrolinx hasn't updated the community on what their current plan is for development, was for a basically neighborhood by neighborhood redevelopment, like a moving block across the city. So you would look at, basically 50 meters to 100 meters, maybe at a time, maybe sometimes 300 meters of the city torn up, blocked off, traffic rediverted, and then just kind of this moving barricade across the city of redevelopment. That was the previous Metrolinx plan. Unfortunately, we haven't heard from Metrolinx at all with the new funding and some of the challenges of the replacement of the subsurface infrastructure. So you have to understand, when I talked about 14 kilometers of redevelopment from property line to property line across the city, that also included subsurface infrastructures. That's new sewer and water, new electrical, new gas, everything that's under the roadbed as well as the roadbed itself. So that means repaving Main, King, and Queenston, means new sidewalks, new traffic signals tied into the new traffic direction hub that the city of Hamilton has. So it's a lot of work that's going to go on, and it's going to involve disruption across the city. But I think what's more important to talk about is that Metrolinx is almost done buying all the properties that they're going to buy for the LRT. They've displaced everybody that the project is going to displace, which is, quite frankly, 150 people probably lost their homes across the LRT from Metrolinx alone. But Metrolinx, that was a small piece of what's to come. What we're seeing right now is already property speculation across the corridor. So the corridor is zoned for between 8 and 11 stories by right across the entire LRT corridor. So we're seeing, for example, in where the old Rebels Rock pub is being redeveloped into a complex. That entire area from Rebels Rock all the way to Stephen Street basically is going to be redeveloped into an 8-story building that will house a whole bunch of people. Those are new condominiums. Those aren't affordable housing. Those aren't rentals. And that wasn't really anything that had to do with Metrolinx displacement. That was just a private developer that came in and snapped up that property. This is going to happen over and over and over again across that corridor and close to that corridor. So if we don't get some kind of grasp on how this change is going to affect folks, and get our city council leaders and our provincial leaders to hear loud and clear that these changes are going to displace people. Like the Metrolinx only will cost 150 people possibly their home, but the private developers are going to cost thousands of people their home possibly as they redevelop that line, because they're going to rush to that property, because what's now maybe a 2-story building with an abandoned store below or an illegal apartment below and a couple of apartments above is now prime real estate for developers. So we have to be asking our city leaders, our provincial leaders, hey, what are you going to do? This project that you're doing is changing. Great. It's going to give us faster transit across the city. I'm going to be able to get to Eastgate and McMaster, without getting stuck in traffic like the B-Line bus or the One King. Oh, that's great. That's higher order transit. That's a great thing. But the higher order transit has the chance to displace the very people who take public transit from places close to public transit. So community benefits and the work of Hcbn is really just to get out there, raise the alarm, and to demand that our city leaders take more of a perspective on this and really put an inclusive, complete communities zone on the redevelopment that's going, and demand inclusionary zoning, demand community benefit charges, demand extra density bonusing includes affordable housing. There's a bunch of tools municipally. Demand that the federal and provincial governments invest real dollars into affordable housing. Demand that Metrolinx actually provide some of the land that they've bought and displaced folks on back to affordable housing providers so they can actually build true affordable housing on that corridor.
Right. So what can the city directly do to mitigate the outcomes that are going to be coming with private developers moving in, property values increasing, in terms of like potentially city buying up land before private developers, or further pushing the provincial government to like implement affordable housing options? What can our councillors do? What can we ask of our councillors?
So there's a variety of reasons. We've talked about inclusionary zoning. That's on the books. This is a transit-oriented development corridor. So the city could, in very short order, if they wanted to expedite it, within 6 or 8 months, pass an inclusionary zoning bylaw that would mandate that all density development along the corridor mandated 20%, 30% affordable housing. They can be land banking right now. So they could be out there buying those commercial strips, some of those underused properties before the developers do. And then when the LRT is complete, put that land back on the market and demand that in exchange for using the land, that 50% of that becomes affordable housing, or the city can then petition to the federal and provincial government with that land, or not-for-profit housing providers, and say, we have this piece of land, we own it. Where can you help us with some of the funding to build inclusionary zoning? They could put a $50 or $100 tax levy on every single property tax owner in the city, and use that to borrow $300 or $500 million over the course of 10 or 20 years to actually build the affordable housing themselves. There's a lot of things that the municipal government can do, and it's why municipal elections are really so important, because the people around that table have the most say in what goes on in our lives. They also have some additional tools in terms of the way that we value land along the corridor. So a square of land, it's actually quite fascinating, is only as valuable as what it's zoned at. And the city of Hamilton controls what it's zoned. If it is zoned to be a single, it's zoned for one story, not commercial. That means you can put one or two houses. You can't even put, because of exclusionary zoning, townhouses on that, so multiple residents. So a square of land, say an empty parking lot or a place where a building's been torn down, the zoning of that land really dictates its values. Whether you can build one single house on it, and that dictates the value, or whether you can build a 30-story tower on that piece of land, massively increases the value of that land. So the city can change the zoning of land, and what some cities are doing is recognize the fact that they have the power to change the zoning of the land. And so going to developers, well, this land is zoned this way, but if we rezone it for much higher density, how much are you prepared to build of affordable housing if we choose to do that? So we'll take your piece of land that you own, but it's only zoned for one story right now. If we rezone that for 6 or 8 stories, so that rather than one house you can build on that land, it's 100 houses you can build on that land, which of course massively increases the profit for the developer from owning that land. Some cities are demanding a more of a share in what that upzoning does for the developer, and telling that developer, okay, what are you going to give us if we upzone that? How many units are you going to build of affordable housing? Are you going to make public parkland available? So the city has some interesting zoning tools that it can play with, in addition to some of the other tools. And of course, there's the advocacy tool. City council needs to be asking right now to Metrolinx, hey, we want first right of refusal on every Metrolinx property. Before you go out to a private developer, as happened in Mississauga, where some of the Huron-Ontario land was just flipped over to a private developer because it was surplus in a big land deal. The city of Hamilton needs to be saying, Metrolinx, you have to give us first right of refusal. And then we can go to Hamilton is Home Coalition, or we can look at our own budgeting and our own planning and figure out, hey, actually, we can use that for parkland. We actually have money that we collected from development charges for parks, so maybe we'll buy that for parkland. Or hey, maybe we can work with the YWCA or Indewell and the provincial government and build some affordable housing on that. So there's lots of things that the city could be doing. Unfortunately, cities haven't done it. In Kitchener-Waterloo, they did nothing to prepare for their LRT project, and it created a massive property boom along the corridor there. Kitchener-Waterloo saw a huge increase in development, and they did nothing. They passed no inclusionary zoning bylaws. Other than collecting the extra taxes from the increased densification, they didn't do anything. And only 11 units of affordable housing were built along that entire LRT corridor in Waterloo. And that's kind of a story of what we shouldn't be doing here in Hamilton, and we need to be doing it now before the shovels even get in the ground.
So, in terms of the advocacy work we're doing right now, just to be transparent, and we currently have finished our survey. It's been sent to the research shop. They're working on it. We have upcoming community dialogues coming up, but there is a timeline on this. And when can the community expect us to start having these negotiations with the city and with Metrolinx?
So right now we've already been talking with some councillors about the concept of a complete community along the Hamilton LRT corridor and what that looks like. And that's why we have that inclusionary zoning town hall, to start talking with folks about inclusionary zoning tools. The Hcbn is actually meeting with Minister Cassie and the federal government on April. But right now, we are in such the early stages of these conversations, and we still haven't even done all of the community consultations that we want to do in terms of hearing from folks. So we're really hoping, as COVID restrictions and COVID lessons and the weather gets better, that we can really start hosting some community engagement dialogues to get out into the public and start talking to people um, about what they want from the community benefits agreement. Like I said, council will be again considering the community benefits protocol advisory committee on March 23rd. That committee that we hoped will become a vessel for all of the community's demands to be presented to city council. So that's coming up. But right now we're still in the very early stages of these conversations. So we just need to hear from folks. We really need to hear from folks. We need you to sign up to our social media, maybe give us your email address so we can put you on our e-blasts. And so we can really start some of the movement building around community benefits, because it's not going to happen without critical mass. I can delegate in front of council all we want. Ishan and I and Kubra can, write counselors all we want, but without a critical mass of concerned folks who are following us, who have some idea of what they'd like from community benefits, it's going to be business as usual at City Hall.
We got a comment from Zoe. Subsurface work should include separating out stormwater from combined sewer lines. Rainwater and runoff does not need to go to the sewage treatment plant. This would provide a community benefit by updating infrastructure and reducing risk of sewage treatment plants surpassing capacity, which increases risk of raw sewage getting into local waterways and the environment.
So it is my understanding that that is actually already being planned with city staff, and that separating, obviously, the sewage from the combined sewage system that already exists is actually in some of the plans that I've seen. But it's something that we want to be, forceful on making sure that happens and monitor once the announcements of the final plans come out. But it is my understanding earlier that some of that subsurface work will require removing the combined sewer system that exists along that corridor, and at least separating out stormwater from sewage.
Thanks for commenting, Zoe. Well, yeah, I'm not sure if there's any other questions we might have left unanswered. Is there anything you would like to add, Carl?
No, just that we're going to try and host some of these a little bit more frequently if folks want to tune in. Hopefully, the next one we'll be able to connect our Instagram on. We weren't able to do that today, and we're just going to continue these dialogues and continue reporting. What I can tell folks is right now, some of the early community conversations that we had in our old community conversations prior to LRT being canceled, and the survey data result are going to be analyzed by our McMaster Community Engagement Office research shops, and they're going to produce a paper just kind of distilling through those recommendations and the stuff that we've heard from folks from the survey. And then we're going to bring that information back to other folks to say, here's what we've heard. Is there anything we're missed? What are the things you'd really like us to narrow down on going into some community benefit conversations? And then we're going to try and push the definitions of community benefits beyond what Metrolinx is used to, which is usually just the professional, administrative, and technical and union apprentice jobs, that 10% aspirational target that the Toronto community benefits, and then a little bit of social procurement, which was able to get from the Eglinton Crosstown and the Finch West LRT, and really make sure that we're advocating for that affordable housing piece and for the necessary municipal and provincial legislation to be passed so that corridor is as inclusive as possible. So thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.